more thing to say, and I know Corine's probably going to hate me for it. But I look around, 20, 30, 40 years ago, we had our kids with us in the rooms where we were at meeting. Madonna had her kids. I had my kid. A lot of the women who were in the movement at that time had their kids. So today, I'm asking each and every one of you, where are the children? Where are our future leaders? They're supposed to be learning from us here, and they're not here. Where are our children?
Not long ago, I was invited to speak on the subject of government surveillance in the 70s, and I was recommended by a woman from the Spokane Reservation because she knew that I lived in Spokane and that I was involved with the American Indian Movement and Leonard Peltier Defense Committee and all that, and so I accepted. And as best I could, I informed them, and I told them I can remember being under surveillance in the 70s, and they wondered why, and I said, because of Leonard Peltier is my friend, and I was doing support work for him, and because I knew Bill Kunstler, he was my lawyer at one time. I mean, he was anywhere Bill went, the press just followed him, you know, and they gave him a bad rap as they did Leonard and the American Indian Movement. So I said, yeah, my support committee in Washington, D.C., their van was broken into, and all the literature on my case. At that time, I was a defendant in the state of Washington versus Yvonne Swan. All the papers were stolen. And I told my son, the American Civil Liberties Union, the National Lawyers Guild, and the Support Native American Solidarity Committee, they sent out information. They said, the FBI is in town, and be careful what you say. If you don't say anything, they can't turn it and use it against you, and beware of people with shiny shoes. And so I told my son, and he was 11, I said, you be careful. You know, I had my house was called the AIM House because we were at the invitation of an elderly lady of the Spokane tribe. We were setting up a temporary spiritual camp on the Spokane Reservation on her property. And Steve Robidoux and Rocky Duenas agreed to help this lady set it up so that we can invite elders from the 4 directions to come and give us some teachings of the old ways, because she said if we don't do this, they'll get lost, the old ways. And so once you guys learn, then you go to your communities and you share what you learn. And so Steve and Rocky did that, and they asked me to help, and so I opened my home in Spokane so that people coming into town could take a shower, use my phone, whatever, camp overnight, bring supplies, go up to the camp 30 miles away. So my house was, they called it the AIM House, which, you know, so this constituted surveillance. My son said, my friends out there said there's police going through the alleyway, you know. Oh yeah? Well, don't answer any questions. If they try to ask you questions, you tell them to come and ask me. And you look at their shoes. Remember what I told you? Okay. So another time he said, Mom, me and he called him by name, we were standing there talking, and this unmarked car comes up, and he said, there's 2 guys in there in suits, and we were wondering what they wanted. And so my friends took off they took off, and he said, so I decided to go home, and that guy got out of that car, and he said, and he had shiny shoes. He said, so I took off running home, and he said, and I jumped over this fence, and that guy grabbed me by the arm as I got over the fence, and he wouldn't let go, and I kept telling him, you let me go, let me go. And he kept saying, I just want to ask you some questions, Darren. How'd you know my name? I just want to ask you some questions. How come you didn't tell me this before? You know, and I asked him, and I don't know, I know why. But I said, well, how did you get away from him? I spit in his face. And I was very angry about that, but of course I didn't do anything. I just was glad that he said, you're going to have to ask my mom about that. And okay, Darren, okay. So, you know, and then even when I was fighting mining on my reservation, I had my son and my nephews all trained security. I said, each one of you are security. Anybody asks for me, you remember what they look like, remember what kind of car they're driving, remember what kind of shoes they're wearing, whatever. And you call me first. or let somebody know. So, okay, they call me, Mom, there's a guy down here, he's got tattoos from head to down his arms and everything, and he said he met you in Montana and he wants to see you. Is he okay? Richard? Yeah, that's who. Okay, send him up. So, you know, that's the way I train my kids. And another day they said there's a big old stretch-mobile going by my house, and I lived in the woods, in the trees, on my reservation. It went past the house, turned around, came back, stopped, and rolled down the window, and then they rolled it up, and then it left. And I thought about John Trudell and his family, how they perished after he burned that flag. And because I was we were up against AMAX, a big rich corporation that wanted to mine on our reservation, that, you know, we better be careful. So we really were praying hard. Every day we had ceremony, Sweat Lodge. So if anybody has anything to say about surveillance, I would like you to say it now. If anybody has anything to say about Leonard Peltier, the panelists here, any advice to the elders, ways that we can show support to help strengthen the women in the movement, give us some advice, give us some help. We represent. There may not be very many of us here, but each of us represent hundreds of people. I came down here as a representative of my family. And I'll go home and I'll have to make a report. And they trust me, they trust my judgment.
I just wanted to add a little bit of what Yvonne was saying, and again, it's just something that I had noticed, is that I lived with Fern for about a year, and she warned us before we moved in that there'd be cars parked out in front of her house, and sure enough there was, you know, nice cars with people in suits across the street. We'd let her know, and she'd go, oh, okay, and she just kind of like, oh, they're there again, and it was a shock to us. That was in, like I said, the early 90s when that happened. And anyway, so we opened up our chapter a couple years ago, and we had been talking to other people, and they had been saying the same thing, like, okay, remember that your phones can be tapped, remember that don't meet at your house, pick a public place, da-da-da-da. So we thought about doing that, and one of the things that came up was a story not too long ago, was, I guess they were peace activists out in Fresno area, and this was just a couple of weeks ago. There was only 7 people in their chapter, but they had found out that they had been infiltrated by a Fed because he had died in a car accident under a different name. And here was a little chapter of peace activists that had been infiltrated because of their work against the war. So if they're being infiltrated, and you're involved in an AIM chapter, there was the third, domestic terrorist group in the nation, then you're going to be infiltrated too. And the feds won't have to do anything if you allow someone in your chapter that's going to be negative and make a lot of disruption with everybody else in your chapter. So everyone has to be vigilant not to allow that negativity to tear down their chapter. Everyone has to be respected and as a family in that chapter in order for it to survive, and know each other very, very well. Because if they could be infiltrated, your chapter will be infiltrated too.
One more story that I want to share with you, and I don't share the story with a lot of people, and I haven't shared the story with anyone until about a year ago, when I was asked about what it felt like to be on the Leonard Peltier Defense Committee back in 87, 88, 89, what it was like to have a daughter, Kathy Peltier. And you all know Anne Begay to Aquash. Okay. When my daughter was about 5 or 6 years old, we were living in Omaha, Nebraska, and she was going to school. I would be so terrified of letting her go anywhere. So finally said, okay, just let her go, let her go. So I would send her around the corner to the gas station to get a Sunday paper. And I'd be like this at the window. When she'd come back, I'd kind of scoot in, but still watch. One day, she went to school, and I timed my routes just so that I could be home seconds before she came around the corner from school. That day, I was home. I didn't know where she was. I looked out the door. I looked out the door. I looked out on the street. I looked over to the corner. I walked to the corner. I walked around the corner. 30 minutes had passed, 45 minutes had passed. I didn't know where she was. I called her friends. They didn't know where she was. I was walking up the street towards the school when I saw this police car, and I just lost it. I said, my daughter's missing. I don't know where she's at. So they helped me find her. We finally found her. My stupid cousin had her. They went to some Indian store and came home, and before they came home, they got her some ice cream so she wouldn't be crying, I want to go home. What scared me about that incident was that years earlier, when she was 2, right after we came home from the longest walk, what happened was I took her to the park. This gentleman sat down next to me with shiny shoes. And I wasn't thinking at the time, and I just watched my daughter play and everything, and he says, that's your daughter? I said, yeah. And he says, who's her father? And I looked at him, I said, none of your business. And he just kept asking a barrage of questions, and I wouldn't even answer him. Finally, he said, well, we know who you are. And if you're smart, you'll know what we did to Anne Begay can happen to your daughter too. So for all those years, it's been terrifying to know that they can do that to my daughter. It pisses me off every time I think of it. It really does. So watch your kids. Don't matter who you are, watch your kids. Always know where they're at. Even now, she's well into her 30s, and I still know where she's at. It still scares me when she goes up, with her friends. It still scares me.